The crystal chandelier swayed almost imperceptibly as the evening thunderstorm pressed against the tall windows of Bellacourt Manor, its hundreds of individual prisms catching the warm glow of candles arranged throughout the dining hall. Elena Vasquez moved between the tables with practiced grace, her black serving uniform pressed sharp despite the humidity that had crept into the old mansion's walls. The silver tray balanced on her left palm carried 4 glasses of Chateau Margaux, each worth more than she earned in a week. She knew this because Marcus Bellacourt, the evening's host and owner of the sprawling estate, had announced the wine's vintage and value to his guests with the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having counted pennies. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The 2009, he'd said, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass. My father purchased 6 cases before he passed. Each bottle is now worth approximately $4,000. But what's the point of collecting if you never enjoy? Elena had watched the reactions ripple through the dinner party. 12 guests seated at the mahogany table that could have accommodated 20. Some nodded with knowing appreciation. Others widened their eyes just enough to communicate impressed surprise without appearing gauche. Mrs. Helena Pritchard, seated to Marcus's right, had actually placed her hand over her heart as if the wine's value had momentarily stopped it from beating. Elena had served these people for 3 years, ever since Bellacourt Manor had opened its doors for exclusive private events, and she'd learned to read their gestures like a language. The manor itself spoke volumes. Built in 1892 by railroad magnate Theodore Bellacourt, the estate sat on 47 acres of carefully maintained grounds just outside Ashford, a town that straddled the uncomfortable line between working-class grit and aspirational wealth. The manor's restoration had been Marcus Bellacourt's passion project, or so he told everyone. Elena suspected it was more about the statement it made. See what I can rebuild. See what I can own. See what you cannot have. She placed the last wine glass before a woman in emerald silk whose name Elena had forgotten. Though she remembered the woman had complained about the temperature of the soup during the previous month's gathering, the woman didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Elena's presence. This was normal. Elena had become skilled at being invisible, at moving through spaces where her existence was required, but not welcomed. Elena called Thomas, the head server, from near the kitchen doors. He gestured toward the drawing room with a slight tilt of his head. Thomas had worked at the manor since the restoration began, had somehow earned Marcus's trust, or at least his tolerance. He was 53, had 2 daughters in college, and treated Elena with a fatherly kindness that she'd come to depend on. They'll want coffee and dessert in the drawing room after dinner. Make sure the cups are properly warmed this time, Mr. Bellacourt noticed last week. Elena nodded, grateful that Thomas gave instructions rather than criticisms. She moved toward the kitchen, passing through the butler's pantry, where silver gleamed in orderly rows and china patterns represented generations of wealth. The kitchen smelled of reduction sauces and dark chocolate, where Chef Antoine was plating individual servings of his signature dessert, a deconstructed opera cake that looked more like an art installation than food. 3 minutes, Antoine announced without looking up from his work. His thick French accent had survived 30 years in America, preserved perhaps by sheer stubbornness. The cognac anglaise must be precisely the right temperature, or the entire composition fails. Elena grabbed the silver coffee service and began the process of warming the porcelain cups, holding each over the steam rising from the industrial espresso machine. Through the service window, she could see the dinner party beginning to rise, the guests following Marcus toward the drawing room, where a Steinway grand piano sat in aristocratic isolation near the windows. The piano had been Theodore Bellacourt's originally, restored and refinished at considerable expense. Marcus occasionally had pianists perform during his gatherings, usually local talent or music students from the conservatory 2 hours north. "Did you hear?" whispered Sarah, one of the newer servers, as she passed Elena with empty water glasses. "Mr. Bellacourt is going to play tonight. He told everyone at dinner that he's been practicing." Elena felt something tighten in her chest, a familiar ache that she'd learned to push down, to ignore, to suffocate before it could surface. She focused on the coffee cups, on the precise angle needed to catch the steam without letting condensation form on the delicate porcelain. "Should be interesting," Sarah continued, oblivious to Elena's silence. "I heard he took lessons as a child but gave it up. Now he's decided to pick it back up. Midlife crisis music appreciation phase, probably." The drawing room was filling as Elena entered with the coffee service. The space was smaller than the dining hall, but no less impressive, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves covering 2 walls, each volume carefully selected to convey intellectual depth. A Persian rug in deep blues and golds anchored the seating area, where leather chairs and a velvet sofa faced the piano. The storm had intensified, rain now clearly audible against the windows, creating a cozy intimacy that made the room feel like a sanctuary from the weather's violence. Marcus stood near the piano, one hand resting on its closed lid with the possessive ease of ownership. He was 46, handsome in the way that expensive grooming and good genetics combined to create, silvering hair precisely cut, skin that spoke of regular dermatologist visits, clothing that fit with the perfection that only bespoke tailoring achieved. He'd made his fortune in commercial real estate development, had transformed several struggling downtown districts into profitable mixed-use developments. The local newspaper called him a visionary. The families displaced by rising rents called him something else. "My great-grandfather purchased this instrument in 1894. Marcus was telling his guests as Elena poured coffee into cups held by outstretched hands. "Steinway Model D. It's been completely restored. Every hammer replaced, the soundboard reinforced. It took 18 months and cost more than some people spend on houses." He laughed, a sound that suggested he enjoyed the disparity. "But music deserves the finest instruments, doesn't it? And I've decided it's time I reacquainted myself with the piano. I stopped playing when I was 16, too busy with other pursuits. But lately, I've felt the pull back to something artistic." Mrs. Pritchard clapped her hands together. "Ah, how wonderful, Marcus. We so rarely see this side of you. The sensitive, creative Marcus." "I wouldn't say sensitive," Marcus replied, lifting the piano's lid and securing it on the long stick. "But I've been working with a tutor for 6 months now. Fundamentals mostly. Scales, simple pieces, building back the muscle memory." He sat on the bench, adjusted his position, flexed his fingers. "I thought I'd play something for you all tonight. Nothing too ambitious, a Chopin Nocturne. The E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. You might recognize it." Elena finished pouring the last cup of coffee and retreated toward the wall near the doorway, where she was expected to remain in case anyone needed anything. Thomas stood near the opposite wall, his expression professionally neutral. Sarah had been dismissed back to the kitchen. The storm outside seemed to pause, or perhaps Elena simply stopped hearing it as Marcus's fingers touched the keys. The opening notes emerged tentative and slightly disconnected, the melody recognizable but lacking cohesion. Marcus played carefully, his eyes fixed on his hands, his shoulders slightly hunched with concentration. The Chopin Nocturne was indeed recognizable, one of the most famous piano pieces ever written, used in countless films and commercials, beloved for its romantic, dreamy quality. But Marcus's rendition stripped away the dreaminess, leaving only the mechanics of music-making. He hit the right notes mostly, stumbled occasionally, recovered with visible effort. His tempo wavered between rushing and dragging. The dynamic contrast that gave the piece its emotional depth was absent. Everything played at approximately the same moderate volume. The guests listened with polite attention. Some nodded along, as if the performance met their expectations. Others smiled encouragingly. When Marcus finished, they applauded with genuine enthusiasm, perhaps relieved it was over, perhaps honestly believing they'd witnessed something special. "That was lovely," Mrs. Pritchard gushed. "Simply lovely. You have such a gift, Marcus." "Well," Marcus said, standing from the bench, with a satisfied smile. 6 months of lessons. Not bad for someone who hadn't touched a piano in 30 years, I think. My instructor says I have natural musicality. He closed the lid gently, almost reverently. Of course, piano is about more than technique. It's about feeling, about understanding what the composer intended. That's what separates those who can play from those who can truly make music. Elena's hands had curled into fists at her sides. She forced them to relax, forced her face to remain expressionless. The ache in her chest had grown into something sharper, something that threatened to push through her carefully maintained composure. "Does anyone else play?" Marcus asked his guests, basking in their continued compliments. "I'd love to hear how others approach the instrument. Though I warn you, the Steinway is quite particular. It requires a delicate touch." Silence settled over the room. The guests exchanged glances, but no one volunteered. Elena knew from conversations she'd overheard that most of Marcus's circle had dabbled in music lessons as children. Violin, piano, flute, but few had continued beyond what was required for college applications or social graces. "Come now," Marcus pressed, enjoying his role as the evening's artistic centerpiece. "Surely someone—" Thomas caught Elena's eye. He knew, of course he knew. In 3 years of working together, during slow prep periods and long evenings after guests had departed, Elena had told him pieces of her story. Not everything, never everything, but enough. He knew about her mother, about Moscow, about the life that had ended and the survival that had begun. His expression now carried a question. "Are you okay?" Elena gave the smallest nod. "I'm fine." "I'm always fine, no one?" Marcus said with exaggerated disappointment. "Well, I suppose good piano requires years of dedicated study. It's not something just anyone can do. The muscle memory, the theoretical understanding, the emotional maturity to interpret the great composers. These things take time and training and, frankly, a certain level of innate talent." He ran his hand along the piano's closed lid one more time. "This instrument deserves respect. It deserves someone who understands its value, both monetary and artistic." Something inside Elena snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Like a thread pulled too tight for too long, suddenly giving way. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, before common sense and self-preservation could intervene. "I can play." The words came out quiet but clear. The drawing room fell silent. All 12 guests turned to look at her, their faces registering surprise that she had spoken at all, that she existed beyond her function as a server. Thomas's eyes widened with concern. Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his tone suggesting he couldn't have heard correctly. "I can play," Elena repeated, her voice stronger now, her heart hammering against her ribs. "If you'd like someone else to play." Marcus's smile spread slowly across his face. Several guests exchanged glances. Was this appropriate? Was this entertainment or awkwardness? Mrs. Pritchard looked scandalized, her mouth forming a small O of shock. "You play piano?" Marcus asked, his amusement obvious now. "You're a waitress who plays piano." "I'm a server," Elena corrected, immediately regretting the correction, knowing it made her sound defensive. "But yes, I studied piano. I could play something if you'd like." The silence stretched. Marcus appeared to be considering, or perhaps just enjoying, the moment. Then he laughed, a short bark of genuine surprise. "This I have to see. By all means, please." He gestured toward the piano with exaggerated courtesy, stepping back to give her space. "The stage is yours. Though I should warn you, the Steinway is temperamental. It's not like whatever you might have practiced on." Elena moved toward the piano, aware of every eye in the room tracking her movement. Her server's uniform suddenly felt costume-like, absurd, wrong for this context. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the bench. She could feel the guests' curiosity mixed with skepticism, could hear the unspoken question. What does a waitress know about a $175,000 instrument? She sat on the bench, adjusting the height slightly. The piano's keys gleamed in the candlelight. She placed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes for just a moment, and let herself remember. Not the years of loss and struggle and survival, not yet, but before. The apartment in Moscow, her mother's voice, the hours of practice, the feeling of music moving through her body as if she and the piano were a single instrument. "What are you going to play?" Marcus asked from somewhere behind her, his tone still amused. "Maybe chopsticks? Heart and soul? Do you know, for Elise? That's a good one for beginners." Some of the guests laughed. Not cruelly exactly, but with the kind of nervous laughter that accompanies social awkwardness. They didn't know what they were supposed to do, how they were supposed to react to this deviation from the evening's script. Elena opened her eyes. She looked at the keys, at the perfect spacing and balance of a world-class instrument. She thought about her mother, about promises made and broken, about the 23 years since she'd last performed publicly, about every moment of silence and invisibility she'd endured. She thought about Marcus's mediocre Chopin, about his casual dismissal of what it meant to truly understand music, about his belief that money could purchase artistry. "I'm going to play Rachmaninoff," she said quietly. "Piano Concerto No. 2, the first movement. Just the piano part, obviously, without the orchestra." The laughter stopped. Marcus's smile faltered for just a second before returning, now tinged with disbelief. "Rachmaninoff? The second concerto?" He laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. That's one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. It requires years of advanced study. Even professional pianists find it challenging." "I know," Elena said. She placed her hands on the keys, felt their smooth coolness beneath her fingers. "I've played it before." "When?" Marcus asked, the challenge clear in his voice. "When did you play Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 emerged from the Steinway like a force of nature awakening. Elena's hands moved across the keys with absolute certainty, her fingers finding the complex chord progressions that announced the piece's famous beginning, those descending bells that seemed to toll from somewhere deep and ancient. The sound filled the drawing room, transformed it, made the expensive furnishings and carefully curated art suddenly irrelevant against the power of the music. The storm outside seemed to synchronize with the piano, thunder rolling in as Elena's hands swept up the keyboard in the dramatic ascending runs that followed the opening. Her body had remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget. Every shift of weight, every subtle movement of her wrists, every pedal change happened without thought, as natural as breathing. The years fell away. She was 14 again, 16, 18, back when music was her entire world, when the piano wasn't a luxury or a hobby, but the language through which she understood everything. The guests had frozen in place, their coffee cups suspended halfway to mouths, their conversations forgotten. Marcus stood near the fireplace, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been anger. This wasn't supposed to happen. The evening's script had been written, and his role as the cultured, artistic host was being rewritten with every measure Elena played. Thomas, still standing near the doorway, had tears forming in his eyes. He'd known Elena could play. She'd told him she'd studied seriously as a child, but knowing and hearing were different universes. He watched her hands fly across the keys, watched the intensity in her face, watched the complete transformation from invisible server to undeniable artist. Elena reached the section where the solo piano carried the melody before the orchestra would typically enter, a passage of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Her left hand provided the rolling, almost hypnotic accompaniment, while her right sang the melody that had made this concerto one of the most beloved pieces in classical music. She played it with the kind of emotional depth that comes not from technical mastery alone, but from lived experience, from understanding what it meant to long for something lost, to remember beauty that had been taken away. The piece's famous lyricism emerged fully realized. Elena's fingers seemed to pull the music from the piano rather than impose it upon the instrument. The Steinway responded like it had been waiting for this, its restored mechanics and carefully calibrated hammers creating a sound that was both powerful and intimate. The piano had probably never been played like this, not since its restoration. Possibly not. Since Theodore Bellacourt had first purchased it over a century ago, Mrs. Pritchard had set down her coffee cup, her earlier scandalized expression replaced by open wonder. The woman in emerald silk leaned forward, her previous indifference vanished. An older gentleman whose name Elena didn't know wiped at his eyes unself-consciously. Music of this caliber didn't ask for permission to move people, it simply did. Elena continued through the movement, her muscle memory flawless despite the decades since she'd last performed this piece. She navigated the technically demanding passages where both hands played rapid, complex patterns in different registers of the piano. She shaped the quieter, more introspective sections with the same care she brought to the dramatic climaxes. This was music that required both power and delicacy, both technical precision and emotional vulnerability. Rachmaninoff had written it during a period of deep personal crisis, emerging from depression and self-doubt, and the concerto carried those shadows even in its most triumphant moments. The first movement built toward its conclusion, the piano and imagined orchestra joining in a final statement of the main themes before the dramatic ending. Elena's hands moved faster, the notes cascading in precisely controlled torrents. The storm outside had reached its peak, rain hammering against the windows as if nature itself wanted to accompany the performance. And then, with a final series of powerful chords, it was over. The silence that followed felt sacred. No one moved. No one spoke. The last notes seemed to hang in the air, sustained by memory rather than vibration. Elena sat at the piano, her hands still on the keys, her breathing slightly elevated from the physical exertion of the piece. She didn't look at the audience, didn't turn to see their reactions. For those minutes, she'd been somewhere else entirely, back in Moscow, back when her mother was alive, back when her future had been clear and bright and full of music. Slowly, she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. She closed the piano's lid carefully, reverently, the way her teachers had taught her always to treat the instrument. Only then did she turn to face the room. The first person to move was the older gentleman who'd wiped his eyes. He began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The woman in emerald silk joined him, then Mrs. Pritchard, then the others, until everyone was applauding, everyone except Marcus, who stood motionless near the fireplace. His face a carefully controlled mask. "My God," said a man Elena recognized as a city councilman. I've never heard anything like that, not even at the symphony." "Who are you?" Elena stood from the bench, smoothing her uniform, the server's role already reasserting itself now that the music had ended. "I should get back to work. There are desserts to serve." "Wait," Mrs. Pritchard said, standing. "You can't just play like that and leave. Where did you study? Who is your teacher? How long have you been playing?" "It doesn't matter," Elena said quietly. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. Mr. Bellacourt, I apologize." "Overstepped?" the councilman interrupted. "You just played one of the most difficult piano concertos ever written, flawlessly on sight, with no warm-up. That's not overstepping. That's extraordinary." Marcus finally spoke, his voice tight and controlled. "Yes, well, it was certainly unexpected. Though playing solo piano arrangements without the orchestra is quite different from performing the actual concerto, and the first movement, while challenging, is actually not the most difficult part of the piece. The third movement is technically more demanding. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, uncomfortable, charged with tension. Several guests glanced between Marcus and Elena, sensing the undercurrent of hostility in his comments. "I could play the third movement if you'd like," Elena heard herself say, the recklessness that had started this still burning in her chest. "Or the complete concerto. All three movements. That won't be necessary, Marcus said sharply. Then, catching himself, he forced a smile. We should move on with the evening. Elena, you're right. There are desserts to serve. Perhaps you should attend to your actual responsibilities. The dismissal was clear. Elena nodded, grateful suddenly for the excuse to escape. She moved toward the kitchen, aware of the whispered conversations starting behind her, the guests processing what they'd just witnessed. Thomas caught her arm gently as she passed. That was, he started, his voice thick with emotion. Elena, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. Why didn't you tell me you could play like that? Because I don't, Elena said. I haven't, not for years. Not since. She stopped, the familiar grief rising. I should get the desserts. In the kitchen, Chef Antoine looked up from arranging edible flowers on the opera cakes. What is happening out there? I hear piano, very good piano, then applause, then shouting. No shouting, Elena said. I played the piano. Mr. Bellacourt's piano. I shouldn't have. Antoine's thick eyebrows rose. You played? You play piano? I used to. A long time ago. In another life. The chef studied her face, reading something in her expression that made him nod slowly. Yes, I understand. We all have other lives, Nan. Lives before this one. I was a chef at a 2-Michelin-star restaurant in Lyon. Now I make opera cake for rich people who complain the portions are too small. He shrugged. This is survival. But tonight you played piano. Tonight you remembered. This is important, I think. Elena helped him arrange the desserts on silver trays. Her hands were shaking slightly, residual adrenaline and emotion making them unsteady. She'd spent 23 years building walls around her memories, around the music, around the person she'd been. One moment of impulse had cracked those walls, and she could feel everything threatening to flood through. She'd been 4 years old when her mother, Elena Vasquez, first placed her hands on the piano keys in their small Moscow apartment. Elena had been a concert pianist herself, trained at the Moscow Conservatory, with a promising career cut short by an injury to her right hand. A door slammed on her fingers in a moment of carelessness that ended everything. Unable to perform, she'd channeled all her love and knowledge into teaching. And when Elena showed not just interest but genuine gift, Irina's life found new purpose. You have something special, a Lyubov Moya, her mother would say during practice sessions that stretched for hours. Your hands know what your mind is still learning. This is rare. This is precious. We must nurture it. Elena's childhood had been structured around music. She woke at 5:30 every morning to practice before school. She practiced again in the afternoon, again in the evening. Her mother was demanding but never cruel, pushing Elena toward excellence not out of vicarious ambition, but out of recognition of true talent that needed proper cultivation. By age 8, Elena was performing in local competitions. By 10, she was winning them. By 12, she'd played with the Moscow Youth Orchestra. At 14, she was accepted into a prestigious music academy. The youngest student in her year, her father, Alejandro Vasquez, was Spanish, a literature professor who'd met Irina during a sabbatical in Moscow and never left. He provided balance to the intensity of Elena's musical education, teaching her about poetry and stories, taking her to museums and theaters, reminding her that music was part of a larger world of art and beauty. He died when Elena was 15, a sudden heart attack that left mother and daughter alone with each other and the piano. The grief had deepened Elena's playing. She'd poured everything into music, her love for her father, her fear of losing her mother, her confusion about the future. At 16, she performed Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto for the first time with the Academy's orchestra. Her mother had cried during the performance, standing in the audience with her damaged hand pressed against her heart. "This is what your father would have wanted to see," Irina had told her afterward. "This is what I live to hear. You don't just play music, Dochka. You understand it. You let it speak through you. This is more than technique. This is art." But art, Elena had learned, wasn't enough to survive on when the world shifted beneath your feet. When Elena was 18, her mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, months, maybe a year with treatment. treatment they couldn't afford, even with Irina's teaching income and the small pension from Alejandro's university. Elena had been preparing for entrance examinations to the Moscow Conservatory, had been practicing 6 to 8 hours daily, had been dreaming of a career as a concert pianist. Instead, she started working. She taught piano to children in the evenings, performed at restaurants and hotels, took any musical work she could find. Her mother continued teaching as long as she was able, but the cancer was aggressive. It took 8 months instead of 12. Elena was 19 when Irina died, her damaged hand finally relaxing after a lifetime of tension. Her last words to Elena, a whisper. "Don't stop playing. Promise me you won't stop," Elena had promised. She'd meant it. But promises made to the dying were sometimes impossible to keep. After her mother's funeral, Elena had sold almost everything. The apartment, her mother's teaching piano, the carefully collected sheet music that represented generations of musical education. She'd used the money to purchase a plane ticket to the United States, where her father's brother, Carlos, lived in a small town called Ashford. Uncle Carlos had left Spain as a young man, had built a life as a building contractor, had married an American woman, and raised 3 American children. He welcomed Elena into his home, gave her a bedroom in the basement, helped her apply for permanent residency through family sponsorship. "You'll play again," he'd promised her during those early months when grief made everything impossible. "Give yourself time. America has opportunities. You'll find your way back to music." But time had a way of moving forward, whether you were ready or not. Elena needed work, legitimate, legal, income-producing work, while her immigration status was being processed. She needed to learn English beyond the basic phrases she'd studied in school. She needed to understand this new country, this new culture, this version of herself that had no mother, no home, no clear purpose. She'd started as a dishwasher at a small Italian restaurant, grateful for work that didn't require much language skill. She'd moved up to prep cook, then server. She'd taken English classes at night, studied with determination that she'd once applied to Chopin etudes and Bach fugues. She'd sent money home to cover her mother's debts, paying off the hospital bills that had accumulated during those final months. She'd helped Uncle Carlos with his mortgage when the construction work slowed during a recession. The piano became something she couldn't afford, emotionally or financially. Every time she heard classical music, it was like pressing on a wound. Every time she passed a music store or saw an advertisement for a concert, the grief threatened to pull her under. So she'd stopped listening to music entirely. She'd avoided it, built her life around its absence, created a version of herself that could function without the thing that had once defined her completely. Uncle Carlos had found the server position at Bellacourt Manor 3 years ago. "It's good money," he'd told her. "Private events, wealthy clients, generous tips. And maybe being around beautiful things again will help. The manor has a piano, I've heard. Maybe it will remind you of what you loved." Instead, it had reminded her of what she'd lost. She'd seen the Steinway during her first day of work, had felt something crack inside her chest at the sight of it. She'd learned to ignore it, to pass by it without looking, to exist in its presence without acknowledging what it represented. When pianists performed during dinner parties, she'd volunteered to work in the kitchen or serve in the dining hall, anywhere but the room where the music was happening. Now, carrying dessert trays back into the drawing room, Elena felt exposed in a way she hadn't experienced in years. The guests looked at her differently now, their eyes following her with curiosity and questions. She was no longer invisible, no longer just part of the manor's elegant backdrop. She'd become interesting, become someone who required explanation. Marcus had returned to his place near the fireplace, but his easy confidence had been replaced by something harder, something brittle. When Elena approached to offer him a dessert plate, he took it without looking at her, turning away to continue a conversation with the councilman that seemed forced and overly loud. "You really should consider performing professionally," Mrs. Pritchard said as Elena served her. "That kind of talent is extraordinary. Have you thought about auditioning for orchestras or teaching? The conservatory might be interested in someone with your abilities. I'm happy where I am, Elena said, the lie smooth and practiced. Thank you for the kind words. But surely you didn't study piano for years, just to serve dinner parties, Mrs. Pritchard pressed. What made you stop performing? The question was innocent, well-meaning, but it felt like a knife between Elena's ribs. What made her stop? Loss, poverty, immigration, survival, grief so overwhelming that touching piano keys felt like touching her mother's gravestone. The impossibility of being who she'd once been when everything that had supported that identity was gone. Life circumstances change, Elena said carefully. Sometimes we make different choices than we expected. She moved away before Mrs. Pritchard could ask more questions, finishing her dessert service with mechanical efficiency. The evening wound down slowly. The storm outside began to ease. Guests started making their departure noises, thanking Marcus for a memorable evening, commenting on the unexpected entertainment. Several tried to speak with Elena again, but Thomas, sensing her distress, intercepted them with practiced skill, directing attention back to Marcus and the evening's official host. At 11:30, the last guest departed. The catering staff began cleanup. Elena moved through the drawing room, collecting coffee cups and dessert plates, trying not to look at the piano that sat closed and silent near the windows. Marcus had disappeared into his study. Thomas supervised the kitchen cleanup. Chef Antoine packed his knives and headed home with a sympathetic pat on Elena's shoulder. You should be proud, he said quietly. Tonight you showed them who you really are. This is not nothing. But as Elena drove home in her decade-old Honda Civic, rain still falling in sporadic bursts, she didn't feel proud. She felt raw, exposed, like she'd opened a door that should have stayed closed. The muscle memory of playing Rachmaninoff lingered in her hands, making them ache with remembrance. She could still hear the music in her head, could still feel the moment when she'd stopped being a server and become, however briefly, a musician again. Her apartment was in the older part of Ashford, a second-floor walk-up in a building that had probably been elegant in the 1960s, but now just looked tired. The rent was $850 a month, utilities not included. Elena kept it clean and sparse, a futon that served as both couch and bed, a small table with 2 folding chairs, a kitchen area with appliances that predated her arrival in America. No piano. She'd considered buying a cheap keyboard over the years, but it had always felt wrong, like a mockery of what she'd once played. She heated water for tea in the microwave. The stove's pilot light had gone out weeks ago, and she hadn't called the landlord to fix it yet. She sat at the small table and looked at her hands, really looked at them for the first time in years. Her mother had always said Elena had perfect hands for piano, strong but flexible, with long fingers and natural span that could reach a tenth comfortably. Now those hands smelled like dish soap and silver polish. Now they served instead of played. The tea grew cold as Elena sat in the apartment's dim light, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. She thought about Marcus's face when she'd offered to play, the mixture of amusement and condescension. She thought about how that expression had changed when the music started, when his understanding of reality had to shift to accommodate something he hadn't expected, hadn't wanted, hadn't believed possible from someone he'd categorized as beneath him. She thought about the promise she'd made to her mother. Don't stop playing. She'd broken that promise every day for 23 years. Tonight, for 12 minutes, she'd kept it. And now, the crack in the wall she'd built was widening, and she didn't know if she had the strength to seal it again or the courage to let it break completely. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Thomas, are you okay? That was something incredible tonight. Call me if you need to talk. Elena set the phone down without responding. She was tired, the kind of tired that came from emotional exhaustion rather than physical work. She changed into pajamas, brushed her teeth, lay down on the futon. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind the clean smell of rain-washed air and the steady drip of water from the building's gutters. She closed her eyes and saw her mother's face, heard her voice, felt the weight of all the years and all the silence pressing down. Tomorrow, she would wake up, would go back to being the version of herself that survived in this new life. But tonight, in the darkness of her small apartment, Elena let herself remember what it had felt like to be whole. Elena woke the next morning to 17 missed calls and 42 text messages. Her phone, usually silent except for work-related communications, had apparently spent the night buzzing with activity while she'd slept the heavy, dreamless sleep of emotional exhaustion. She squinted at the screen, confused about who could possibly be trying to reach her with such urgency. Most of the messages were from numbers she didn't recognize, but scanning through them revealed a pattern that made her stomach drop. They were all about last night. Someone had filmed her performance. Of course someone had, because people filmed everything now, and the video had been posted online. "OMG, is this you?" read a message from Sarah, the newer server from the manor. "You're going viral!" Elena's hand shook as she opened the link Sarah had sent. The video had been posted to TikTok by someone named Helena Pritchard Official, Mrs. Pritchard, apparently maintaining a social media presence. The caption read, "When the waitress plays Rachmaninoff better than any professional pianist I've ever heard." Full body chills. This happened last night at a private dinner party. Who is she? Classical music, hidden talent, Rachmaninoff, piano virtuoso, mind blown. The video had 2.3 million views. 2.3 million, posted just 8 hours ago. Elena watched herself in the shaky phone footage. The camera had been positioned at an angle that showed her face and hands clearly, capturing the intensity of her expression and the blur of her fingers across the keys. The audio quality was surprisingly good, the phone's microphone somehow catching the richness of the Steinway's sound. The video ended with the applause, but someone had added a freeze frame of her face at the last moment, her expression unguarded, vulnerable, lost in the music. The comments section had exploded. Thousands upon thousands of responses. People arguing about whether the video was real or faked, debating the difficulty of the piece, demanding to know who she was and where she'd trained. Several classical music accounts had reposted it. A famous concert pianist with millions of followers had commented, "This is the real deal." Whoever this woman is, she has conservatory-level training. The technique is flawless, but more importantly, the interpretation shows deep understanding. Someone find her. Elena felt like she couldn't breathe. This wasn't supposed to happen. Last night was supposed to be a moment, contained and controlled, something she could process privately and then bury again. Now it was everywhere, spreading like wildfire, her face and her story, however incomplete, being consumed by strangers around the world. More messages came through as she stared at the phone. Thomas had sent several, all variations of concern. "Elena, call me please. This is getting intense. Mr. Bellacourt called emergency staff meeting for this afternoon. He seems not happy. Uncle Carlos had texted, 'Mija, why didn't you tell me you could play like this?' I'm watching a video everyone at the construction site is sharing. I'm crying at work, Elena. I had no idea what you gave up. Call me. Please call me." 3 missed calls from the Ashford Daily Register, the local newspaper. 2 from radio stations. 1 from an area code she didn't recognize that her phone had flagged as potential spam, but now seemed like it might be something else. Elena set the phone down on the table and put her head in her hands. This was exactly what she'd feared, exactly why she'd kept her past locked away. Music had been her private grief, her personal loss, something she carried quietly. Now it was public property, subject to analysis and judgment and questions she couldn't answer without unraveling completely. She forced herself to shower and dress, moving through her morning routine with mechanical precision. She had a shift at the manor today. Ironically, not an evening event, but afternoon prep work for a wedding scheduled for tomorrow. She considered calling in sick, but the thought of staying in her apartment while her phone continued exploding with notifications felt worse than facing whatever waited at work. The drive to the manor felt surreal. She passed the coffee shop, where she sometimes stopped for caffeine, and saw people inside, heads bent over phones, possibly watching her play piano. She stopped at a red light next to a teenager in the adjacent car, windows down, and heard classical music playing. Not her video, but the coincidence felt pointed, like the universe was mocking her. Bellacourt Manor looked different in daylight, less imposing. The architecture impressive but not magical, without the drama of evening lighting. Elena parked in the staff lot and walked through the service entrance, bracing herself for whatever came next. The kitchen was unusually quiet when she entered. The prep cooks glanced up at her, then quickly looked away. Sarah stood near the coffee station and gave Elena a thumbs up that seemed both enthusiastic and apologetic. Thomas emerged from the butler's pantry, his expression grave. "You're here," he said. "Good. Mr. Bellacourt wants to see you in his study. Now before we start prep." Elena's stomach clenched. "Did he say what about?" "He didn't have to." Thomas gestured to his own phone, lying on the counter with Elena's viral video paused on the screen. Elena, this is everywhere. Classical music websites are writing articles. The local news called 6 times this morning. Someone identified you from the video and posted your name. There are reporters outside the front gate. Reporters. Elena felt the room tilt slightly. "Here now?" 3 news vans. Mr. Bellacourt is livid. He says they're trespassing, that they're disrupting business, that this is completely unacceptable. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Elena, I don't know what he's going to say to you in there, but be careful. He's not handling this well." Elena nodded, her mouth too dry to speak. She walked through the familiar hallways toward Marcus's study, each step feeling like approaching an execution. The study door was open. Marcus sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his laptop turned toward him, his expression controlled, but his jaw tight with tension. "Close the door," he said without looking up. "Sit down." Elena obeyed, sinking into one of the leather chairs facing the desk. The study smelled of old books and expensive cologne. Behind Marcus, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the manor's gardens, where Elena could see in the distance the news vans Thomas had mentioned parked beyond the property's gates. "Do you know what you've done?" Marcus asked, finally looking at her. His voice was quiet, which somehow felt more threatening than yelling. "Do you have any concept of the disruption you've caused?" "I'm sorry," Elena said automatically. "I didn't know anyone was filming." "You didn't mean to make me look like a fool," Marcus interrupted. "You didn't mean to humiliate me in front of my guests. You didn't mean to turn my home into a media circus." He turned the laptop around so Elena could see the screen. It showed an article from a classical music website with the headline, "Mystery Waitress Outplays Millionaire Host in Viral Piano Performance." The article wasn't flattering to Marcus. It described his mediocre attempt at Chopin, followed by Elena's masterful Rachmaninoff, framing the evening as a David and Goliath story where the wealthy amateur was humbled by the working-class virtuoso. The writer had used words like pretentious and exposed and poetic justice. "I didn't write that article," Elena said quietly. "I didn't ask for any of this. But you did ask to play my piano. You volunteered in front of my guests to show off. And now," Marcus gestured at the window at the distant news vans, "now I have reporters calling, asking for comments about the talented server I've been hiding, as if I knew. As if this was some kind of deliberate setup. It wasn't, I used to play a long time ago, and I don't care about your background," Marcus cut her off. "I care about my reputation. I care about the fact that every article about this makes me look like an arrogant dilettante who can't recognize talent. Do you know how many business contacts I've heard from this morning? How many people have sent me that video with laughing emojis?" Elena felt something harden in her chest. "I'm sorry your ego's hurt, but I played piano. That's all I did. I didn't insult you. I didn't mock you. I just played." "You made a spectacle," Marcus said coldly. "You turned an elegant evening into a performance piece at my expense. And worse, you've created a liability for this estate. Those reporters aren't just interested in you. They're interested in accessing my property, filming my home, treating this place like it's public domain. So what do you want me to do? Elena asked, feeling her voice shake despite her attempt to stay calm. I can't undo it. The video is out there. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with calculating eyes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop talking to media immediately. No interviews, no statements, no social media responses. If anyone asks about last night, you decline to comment. You don't confirm or deny anything. I haven't talked to anyone, and you won't, Marcus continued. Furthermore, your employment here is suspended pending review. With pay, he added, as if this was generous. I can't have reporters following you onto the property. I can't have guests wondering if their server is going to overshadow their events. You've become a distraction, Elena. An expensive one. The words hit like physical blows. Suspended distraction. Elena thought about her rent, her car payment, the money she sent to cover her mother's remaining debts. She thought about the stability she'd built over 3 years of careful work, now crumbling because she'd broken her own rule about staying invisible. How long is the suspension? She asked. Until this dies down. A week, maybe 2, or... Marcus paused, letting the alternative hang in the air. Or you could make this work for both of us. Elena frowned. What do you mean? This video is getting millions of views. People are fascinated by the story. The talented server, the hidden genius, all that inspirational nonsense. There's value in that narrative if it's properly managed. Marcus tapped his fingers on the desk. The Manor could host a concert, a formal event. You'd perform, we'd sell tickets, donate proceeds to charity. It becomes a story about me recognizing and supporting local talent. It rehabilitates my image and satisfies public curiosity about you. You want me to perform a concert? Here? Why not? You clearly have the ability, and it would resolve this situation elegantly. I'd look magnanimous. You get your moment in the spotlight. The media gets their story. Everyone wins. Elena stared at him, trying to process the audacity. He wanted to turn her trauma, her loss, her private grief into a public relations opportunity. He wanted to package her music, the thing she'd protected by silence for 23 years, as content for his reputation rehabilitation. No, she said. Marcus's expression hardened. No. I don't perform anymore. I told you, I used to play. Last night it was a mistake. I'm not a concert pianist. I'm not interested in being one. You're not interested in being employed either, it seems, Marcus said coldly. Because let me be clear, if you don't help resolve this situation, there won't be a job to come back to after your suspension. I'll have cause to terminate you, bringing unwanted media attention to the estate, creating a hostile work environment, insubordination. My lawyers can make it stick. You can't fire me for playing piano. I can fire you for violating the employee handbook section on maintaining professional boundaries with guests. You inserted yourself into a social gathering in an inappropriate manner. It's all documented in company policy. Marcus smiled, the expression devoid of warmth. Or you can do one concert, help me fix this mess, and keep your job. Your choice. Elena felt trapped, the walls closing in. She needed this job. She couldn't afford unemployment, couldn't afford the gap in her resume, couldn't afford to start over again in a job market that wasn't kind to 42-year-old immigrants with spotty work histories. But the thought of performing publicly, of exposing herself that completely, of letting strangers consume her music and her story, it felt impossible. I need time to think, she said. You have until tomorrow morning, Marcus replied. Email me your decision by 9 a.m. If I don't hear from you, I'll assume you're choosing unemployment. He turned his laptop back around, dismissing her. Thomas will have your suspension paperwork. You can collect your personal items from your locker and go. Elena stood on shaky legs and left the study, walking back through the hallways that suddenly felt hostile. In the kitchen, Thomas had the paperwork ready, his face apologetic. I'm sorry, he said quietly as she signed the forms. This isn't right. You didn't do anything wrong, didn't I? Elena took her copy of the paperwork. I knew better. I knew to stay quiet, stay invisible. I broke my own rules. Playing beautiful music isn't breaking rules, Thomas said firmly. It's being human. Marcus is just... He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. He's embarrassed. He spent 6 months learning piano so he could show off, and then you reminded everyone what actual mastery looks like. His ego can't handle it. Elena gathered her few personal items from her locker, a change of shoes, a sweater, a book she'd been reading during breaks. Sarah appeared as she was leaving, phone in hand. Elena, wait. You have to see this. Sarah pulled up another video, this one from someone Elena didn't recognize. It showed Marcus's performance from last night, the mediocre Chopin, edited directly next to Elena's Rachmaninoff. Someone had added split-screen effects and labeled them amateur versus master with arrow graphics. The video had 800,000 views and climbing. People are doing side-by-sides, Sarah explained. Comparing you two. There are memes, musical analysis videos. Someone even did an auto-tune remix that's actually kind of funny. She stopped, seeing Elena's expression. Sorry, I thought you'd want to know. Elena left through the service entrance, trying to avoid the front gates where the news vans waited. But somehow, they'd been alerted to her departure. As she walked toward her car, a woman with a microphone and a cameraman intercepted her path. Elena Vasquez. I'm Jennifer Torres from Channel 7 News. Can we ask you a few questions about your viral piano performance? No comment, Elena said, fumbling with her car keys. Our viewers are dying to know your story. Where did you train? Why are you working as a server instead of performing professionally? Is it true that Marcus Bellacourt didn't know about your background? I said no comment. Please move. But 2 more reporters had appeared, blocking her path to the car. Cameras filming, microphones extended, questions overlapping. Elena, what made you decide to play last night? Do you have a concert career planned? How does it feel to become an overnight internet sensation? Did Marcus Bellacourt treat you unfairly? Elena felt panic rising, her chest tightening, the world narrowing to the circle of cameras and expectant faces. She pushed past them without answering, reaching her car and locking herself inside. The reporters didn't leave. They stood outside, filming her through the windows, capturing her distress, turning her panic into content. She started the engine with shaking hands and drove away too fast, barely checking for traffic. In her rearview mirror, she saw the reporters running back to their vans, probably planning to follow her home. She took random turns through residential streets, trying to lose them, her heart hammering against her ribs. 20 minutes later, she pulled into Uncle Carlos's driveway instead of going to her apartment. His truck was there. He must have left the construction site early. She sat in her car for a moment, trying to compose herself, trying to stop shaking. Before she could decide whether to go inside, the front door opened and Carlos stepped out, concern etched deep in his weathered face. "Mija," he said, opening her car door. "Come inside. You look like you've seen ghosts." His house was exactly as Elena remembered from her first days in America. Comfortable clutter, family photos on every wall, the smell of coffee always brewing. Carlos's wife, Beth, was at work, and his children were grown and gone, so the house felt quiet and safe. Carlos guided Elena to the kitchen table and poured her coffee without asking. "I saw the video," he said, sitting across from her. "Everyone saw the video. Elena, why didn't you tell me you could play like that? In 11 years you never mentioned, 'because I can't,'" Elena interrupted. "I mean, I can, obviously, but I don't. I haven't. Not since Mama died." It was too hard, Tio Carlos. Every time I thought about playing, I thought about her, about everything I lost, about the life I was supposed to have. So I stopped. I just stopped. But last night you didn't stop. Last night I was stupid. I was angry. This rich man playing badly, talking about talent and training like he understood what those words meant, and I snapped. I proved a point that didn't need proving. And now my life is falling apart. She told him everything. The suspension, Marcus's ultimatum, the reporters, the feeling of being trapped between impossible choices. Carlos listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she described Marcus's threats. "He can't blackmail you like this. Carlos said when she finished. This is... Elena, this is wrong. You played piano at a party. That's not a crime. That's not even inappropriate. But I did violate professional boundaries, Elena said tiredly. He's not completely wrong. I inserted myself into a social situation where I was supposed to be staff. I made it about me instead of staying in my role. Your role? Carlos's voice rose. Your role is what? A servant who isn't allowed to have talents? Who has to hide who she is to make rich people comfortable? He stood up, pacing the kitchen. No, this is exactly what's wrong with this country sometimes. People like Marcus, they want to keep people like us in boxes. Server, construction worker, house cleaner, we can be those things, but we're not allowed to be more. We're not allowed to remind them that we're complicated, that we have histories, that we might be better at something than they are. It's not that simple. It is that simple. Carlos turned to face her. Elena, your mother made me promise when she was dying that I would take care of you, that I would help you build a new life. I've tried. I've done my best, but I failed you in one important way. I never asked what it cost you to give up music. I never pushed you to play again. I let you bury that part of yourself because it seemed easier. But seeing that video, hearing what you can do, I realize what we both lost. What you sacrificed. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. I didn't have a choice. I needed to survive. Music doesn't pay bills. Music doesn't get you a green card or put food on the table. But music is who you are, Carlos said gently, returning to sit across from her. And hiding who you are to make other people comfortable, that's not surviving. That's disappearing. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kitchen clock ticking loudly. Elena thought about her mother's apartment in Moscow, about the hours of practice, about the way music had once made her feel complete. She thought about the past 23 years, about the person she'd become by subtraction, defined more by what she'd given up than what she'd gained. What do I do? She asked finally. What do you want to do? I want to go back to last week, when no one knew who I was or what I could do. When I could just exist quietly, Carlos shook his head. That's not an option anymore. You can't unring this bell. So the real question is, what do you want now? Knowing you can't go back, only forward, what direction do you choose? Elena didn't have an answer. She stayed at Carlos's house through the afternoon, helping him fix a leaky faucet in the bathroom, grateful for the distraction of physical work. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications she ignored. As evening approached, Beth came home from her job as a dental hygienist and immediately pulled Elena into a hug. I've watched that video 15 times, Beth said. You're incredible. I can't believe you've been keeping this secret. It wasn't a secret exactly, just not relevant. Not relevant. Elena, you're brilliant. That's always relevant. They ate dinner together, Beth's pot roast, which Elena barely tasted. The conversation danced around the obvious questions until Beth finally asked directly, So what's your plan? Are you going to do the concert Marcus wants? I don't know, maybe. It's either that or lose my job, apparently. Sounds like extortion, Beth said bluntly. You should talk to a lawyer. Lawyers cost money I don't have. And even if Marcus is being unfair, he's not completely wrong. I did create this situation. I put myself in the spotlight by being talented. Carlos's voice held frustration. Elena, listen to yourself. You're apologizing for being good at something. That's not right. Later that evening, alone in Carlos's guest room that still held traces of her first months in America, Elena finally looked at her phone. The notifications had multiplied exponentially. The video now had over 5 million views. Someone had created a Wikipedia page for her with the sparse information they'd managed to find online. A classical music podcast had devoted an entire episode to analyzing her performance. 3 different concert halls had posted messages asking her to contact them about performance opportunities. But the message that caught her attention was an email from an address she didn't recognize. Email protected. The subject line read, From one pianist to another. Elena opened it hesitantly. Elena Vasquez had spent 23 years making herself invisible. Working as a server at the prestigious Bellacourt Manor, she moved through elegant dinner parties like a ghost, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates while remaining carefully unnoticed. But invisibility was her chosen armor, protection against a past that had once defined her completely. That past began in Moscow, where young Elena trained at the youth academy under the legendary instructor Elena Volkov. Music wasn't just Elena's talent, it was her entire world. Her mother, a pianist herself, had sacrificed everything to ensure Elena received the finest training. But life shattered those dreams when her father died suddenly, followed by her mother's cancer diagnosis. At 19, Elena faced an impossible choice: stay in a country that no longer felt like home, or emigrate to America with her uncle Carlos. Abandoning the musical career her mother had built her entire life around, she chose survival. She chose her mother's final months. And when her mother died, making Elena promise never to stop playing, Elena broke that promise. For 23 years, she buried her gift beneath layers of ordinary life, never touching a piano, never allowing herself to remember what she'd lost, until Marcus Bellacourt's birthday party changed everything. Marcus, the manor's wealthy owner, fancied himself a pianist. During his celebration, he sat at his prized Steinway, performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with technical competence but emotional emptiness. When he finished, he noticed Elena, this quiet waitress he barely knew, standing transfixed by the instrument. On impulse, fueled by wine and ego, he laughed and challenged her. "You look like you want to try. Go ahead, show us what you've got." It was meant as entertainment, a moment of condescension. But when Elena's fingers touched those keys, after 23 years of silence, something profound happened. She didn't just play Rachmaninoff, she became the music. Every note carried the weight of her grief, her training, her mother's legacy. The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus's face darkened with humiliation as the vast difference between playing notes and understanding music became painfully clear. Someone filmed it. By morning, the video had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Waitress stuns wealthy guests. The internet, in its chaotic way, had exposed Elena's secret to the world. Marcus, embarrassed and angry, called Elena to his office with an ultimatum: perform in a charity concert he would organize or lose her job. It was exploitation disguised as opportunity, and Elena knew it. But she was broke, isolated and terrified. Enter two unexpected allies. Her uncle Carlos, the man who'd brought her to America, researched employment law and reminded Elena she had more power than she realized. And Dr. Sarah Chen, director of piano studies at the Ashford Conservatory, who'd seen the video and recognized something rare, not just talent, but a profound loss that only another musician could understand. Dr. Chen had lost her own teacher to cancer and stopped playing for 2 years. She understood Elena's silence. Over coffee, she told Elena something that would change everything. The music doesn't die when the teacher dies. It keeps living, keeps waiting. Every day you don't play is a day you're choosing silence over the legacy she gave you. With Carlos's strategic support and Dr. Chen's artistic kinship, Elena found the courage to push back. She sent Marcus an email that was both brave and clear. She wouldn't be coerced, but she would consider performing on her terms. The venue would be the conservatory, not his manor. She would choose the program. All proceeds would benefit music education for underprivileged children. Her employment would be secure regardless. Marcus, advised by his lawyer that he'd crossed legal lines, agreed to everything. He even wrote a $25,000 check to the Youth Music Fund as an apology, acknowledging that Elena had shown him the humbling difference between technical skill and true artistry. 2 weeks later, Elena stood backstage at Hamilton Hall before 300 people. Her program was ambitious: Bach, Chopin, and the complete Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece that had started everything. She was terrified. 23 years is a lifetime in music. But when she walked onto that stage and placed her hands on the Steinway Grand, something extraordinary happened. The music poured out, not just technically perfect, but emotionally transcendent. She played for her mother, for herself. For every moment of beauty, she denied herself in the name of mere survival. She played like someone who had been lost and was finally finding her way home. The audience rose in thunderous applause, many openly weeping. Uncle Carlos beamed with pride. Even Marcus Bellacourt clapped with genuine appreciation, finally understanding what real mastery looked like. For her encore, Elena chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, her mother's favorite. As the delicate notes filled the hall, she felt her mother's presence not as grief anymore, but as blessing, as permission to be whole again. She'd kept her promise after all, just 23 years late. Elena's story reminds us that our gifts don't disappear when we bury them. They wait, patient and persistent, for the moment we're brave enough to reclaim them. It shows us that survival sometimes means setting aside what we love most, but healing means allowing ourselves to love again. And it proves that standing up for ourselves, even when we're terrified, can open doors we never imagined possible. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. We share inspiring stories every week about ordinary people who discover extraordinary courage when life demands impossible choices. Stories about hidden talents, unexpected allies, and the beautiful, messy journey of becoming who we were always meant to be. Click that subscribe button and join our community, because everyone has a gift worth reclaiming, and everyone deserves to hear stories that remind them they're not alone. Thank you for listening.